May 1943. In the crushing, inky blackness of the North Atlantic, 230 miles west of the Faroe Islands, Captain Lieutenant Max Martin Tykert of U-456 stood on the conning tower bridge, the cold sea spray misting his face as he glanced at his watch. The luminous hands read 3:47 a.m. The darkness was absolute, a void that swallowed light and sound. The sea was unnervingly calm, a sheet of black glass. His submarine, a lethal Type 7C U-boat, had surfaced 22 minutes ago to recharge its vital batteries and vent the stale, recycled air from within its steel hull. This was standard procedure. A nightly ritual of vulnerability, a calculated risk they had taken hundreds of times before. The lookout, perched high with powerful binoculars, swept the horizon and reported back. Skies clear, Herr Kalun. No visual contacts. No apparent threats. But then, a voice crackled through the intercom from the radio room below, tinged with an unfamiliar note of confusion.
Herr Kalun.
I'm detecting an unusual radar signal. It doesn't match any known pattern. Tykert frowned, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. The Germans had begun equipping their U-boats with Metox radar detectors, nicknamed the Biscay Cross for its distinctive antenna shape. This device was their electronic guardian angel, designed to scream a warning when Allied aircraft painted them with their search radars. The Metox had saved their lives dozens of times, giving them just enough warning to crash dive into the safety of the depths before an attack could materialize. But this was different. How different? Tykert's voice was sharp, cutting through the night air. The frequency is much higher than normal, Herr Kalun. Almost centimetric. A 10-centimeter wavelength. Our Metox can barely pick it up. It's like a whisper. A cold dread, colder than the Atlantic wind, traced a path down Tykert's spine. He was a veteran, a decorated commander, but this felt new. This felt wrong. Dramatic pause. What he couldn't possibly know was that his boat was being illuminated by a revolutionary technology the Germans believed was impossible to build. A ghost in the machine. A death sentence signed in microwaves. If you want to discover how this single, top-secret weapon completely flipped the script in the Battle of the Atlantic, smash that like button. Your support helps us bring more incredible, verified stories like this out of the archives and onto your screen. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. High above, flying at 800 feet, a modified consolidated B-24 Liberator bomber carved through the night, a four-engine Spectre utterly invisible in the moonless sky. Its crew had already spotted the faint electronic signature of U-456 on their radar screens from a distance of 12 miles. The pilot, Captain Robert Braithwaite of the Royal Air Force's 120 Squadron, had already begun his silent, deadly attack run. The hunter was closing in on its prey, and the prey had no idea it was even being stalked. Tykert, trusting the instinct that had kept him and his crew alive through 12 previous war patrols, made the only decision he could. He slammed his hand on the dive alarm button. Alarm. Crash dive. Crash dive. The piercing shriek of the horn echoed through the steel tube. The routine calm shattered. The crew, who moments before were sleeping or reading, exploded into a frenzy of disciplined action. Men scrambled for their stations. The lookouts on the bridge didn't bother with the ladder. They hurled themselves down the hatch into the control room. Valves were wrenched open, and the ballast tanks began to flood with thousands of gallons of seawater, pulling the U-boat beneath the waves. But this time it was different. A typical U-boat needed between 25 and 30 seconds to fully submerge from the surface. A lifetime or a death sentence, depending on the circumstances. Tykert knew this. The Allies knew this too. What the Germans didn't know was that the Allies could now track them through every single second of that desperate dive. The B-24 Liberator hurtled out of the darkness at 230 miles per hour. Its navigator, Lieutenant James Holland, kept his eyes glued to the mesmerizing green glow of the ASV Mark III centimetric radar scope. The glowing blip that represented U-456 was growing larger, more intense, as the distance to the target vanished. 3 miles, Holland called out, his voice steady over the intercom. 2 miles. 1 mile. At a distance of half a mile, the bomber's gunner flipped a switch. Mounted under the bomber's wing, a 24-inch carbon arc searchlight, known as the Lee light, blazed to life. A blindingly brilliant beam of 70 million candle power sliced through the absolute darkness, instantly illuminating the U-456 as if it were high noon on a summer's day. Sound of a powerful, humming ignition followed by the roar of the B-24's engines. Teichert was halfway down the conning tower hatch when the light hit him. It was a physical blow, a searing, white-hot intensity that vaporized the darkness and blinded him completely. He looked up, his eyes struggling to adjust, and saw a sight that would be seared into his memory for the final 90 seconds of his life. A colossal, 4-engine bomber, a monster of riveted aluminum, descending directly toward him, its bomb bay doors yawning wide open like the gates of hell. "Mein Gott!" he screamed. "My God!" There was no time for anything else. From a perilously low altitude of just 50 feet, the B-24 released a string of Mark 11 depth charges. 4 black cylinders, each weighing 375 pounds, tumbled through the air in a perfect, calculated sequence. They were designed to bracket the submarine, set to explode at different depths to ensure a kill. The first depth charge struck the water just 30 feet from U-450 SIXS pressure hull. Sound of a massive splash, it was fused to detonate at a depth of 25 feet. Dramatic pause, it exploded at the precise moment the submarine, in its frantic emergency dive, reached that exact depth. Sound of a massive, deep, concussive underwater explosion. The explosion was devastating. A shockwave of pure energy tore through the water at nearly 5,000 feet per second, slamming into the pressure hull of U-456 with a force of over 2,000 pounds per square inch. The 0.7-inch thick steel plates, designed to withstand the immense pressure of the deep ocean, buckled and warped in an instant. Inside the submarine, hell was unleashed. The sailors closest to the blast died instantly, their internal organs turned to pulp by the concussive force. Others were picked up and slammed against steel bulkheads and machinery at lethal velocities. Pressure gauges shattered, sending shards of glass flying like shrapnel. The lights flickered and died, plunging the interior into absolute, terrifying darkness, broken only by the sparks of shorting electrical systems. The second and third depth charges detonated in rapid succession, each blast widening the fractures in the tormented hull. Seawater, cold and black, began to jet into the boat through a dozen different breaches, the streams hitting with the force of a fire hose. Teichert, still clinging desperately to the ladder in the conning tower, felt the submarine lurch violently as it began to sink by the stern. The angle of descent increased rapidly. 15 degrees, 25 degrees, 35 degrees. He tried to shout orders, but the intercom was dead. He tried to scramble down into the control room, but the rising water was already at his waist, and the deck was tilted at an impossible angle. Through the deafening roar of incoming water, he could hear the screams of his men. 49 souls. Most of them younger than 25, many on their very first combat patrol, now trapped in a steel coffin. The fourth and final depth charge detonated directly beneath the engine room. The massive 2,800 horsepower diesel engines were torn from their mountings. The propeller shaft twisted like a pretzel. The pressure hull finally gave way completely, with a deep, groaning screech that Allied sailors often described as the cry of a dying whale. U-456 plunged toward the Atlantic seabed at a rate of 10 feet per second. At 650 feet, the bow and stern sections tore apart. At 1,300 feet, the remaining sections collapsed completely under the crushing hydrostatic pressure of over 600 psi. From the B-24 circling above, the crew watched the horrific spectacle unfold in the stark beam of their lee light. They saw the submarine's conning tower disappear beneath the waves. They saw diesel fuel and oil bubble to the surface, forming a dark, circular stain that expanded with sickening speed. They saw fragments of wood, clothing, and other debris float to the top. They saw no survivors. Captain Braithwaite spoke into his microphone, his voice grim and professional as he recorded the event in his flight log. U-boat destroyed. Coordinates 62 north, 14 west. Time 3:49. No survivors. The total time from the initial radar detection to the complete destruction of the enemy vessel, 5 minutes and 30 seconds. The time from the moment U-456 began its crash dive to its utter annihilation, just 90 seconds. Captain Lieutenant Max Martin Teichert was 28 years old. In his previous patrols, he had sunk 6 Allied merchant ships, totaling nearly 33,000 tons. He had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class just 3 months earlier. His body, along with the bodies of his 49 crewmen, remains entombed in the wreck of U-456, 1,600 feet down in the icy, silent darkness of the North Atlantic. But the story of the weapon that destroyed him was just beginning. The ASV Mark III centimetric radar was developed in absolute secrecy by British scientists at the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern, England. The project hinged on a revolutionary invention, the resonant cavity magnetron, a device capable of generating high-power microwaves at a 10-centimeter wavelength. The Germans knew that such a radar was theoretically possible, but their own top scientists had concluded that manufacturing a magnetron powerful and reliable enough for military use would require at least 5 more years of development. They were catastrophically wrong. The British hadn't just built the radar, they had miniaturized it enough to fit into the cramped confines of a maritime patrol aircraft. And they had paired it with the Lee light to create a nocturnal hunting system that the U-boats could neither detect nor evade. The impact on the German Kriegsmarine was immediate and catastrophic. Before May of 1943, U-boats operated with relative safety at night. They would surface after dusk to charge their batteries, knowing that older Allied radars, which operated on a 1.5-meter wavelength, were easily picked up by their METOX warning systems. After May 1943, the night became a death trap. The new centimetric radar operated on a frequency that the METOX simply couldn't hear reliably. U-boat commanders would receive a warning far too late, or not at all. By the time they saw the blinding glare of the Lee light, it was already over. The statistics tell the brutal story. In the first 6 months of the centimetric radar's deployment, from May to October 1943, U-boat losses skyrocketed. 47 German submarines were destroyed directly by aircraft equipped with the ASV Mark III radar and Lee lights. 47 submarines. 2,209 German sailors killed. A devastating blow to the German war machine. But the psychological impact was even more profound. U-boat commanders, the elite Grey Wolves of the Kriegsmarine, began to report a terrifying sense of absolute vulnerability. They couldn't surface during the day because of aircraft. Dramatic music swells now. They couldn't surface at night for the same reason. They couldn't properly recharge their batteries. They couldn't chase convoys on the surface at high speed. Their primary advantage, the cloak of invisibility, had been stripped away by an invisible enemy. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, the iron-willed commander of the U-boat fleet, wrote a grim entry in his war diary on May 24, 1943, exactly 2 weeks after the destruction of U-456. The enemy has rendered vast areas of the ocean inoperable with his new detection methods. We can no longer operate in the North Atlantic with the current losses. We have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. It was the first time Donitz had ever admitted defeat. The numbers backed him up. In May 1943, a period that would become known to the Germans as Black May, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats, the single worst month of the entire war for the submarine fleet. Allied convoys, which had previously suffered losses of 20 or 30% of their ships, were now crossing the Atlantic with losses of less than 1%. The Germans scrambled for desperate countermeasures. They developed the Naxos detector, capable of picking up the centimetric radar signals, but it arrived too late and in insufficient numbers. They created the snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed U-boats to run their diesel engines and recharge batteries while submerged, but it drastically reduced their speed and operational capability. They designed new, advanced Type XXI submarines with higher underwater speeds, but only a handful entered service before the war ended. Nothing worked. The centimetric radar, combined with other Allied technologies like high-frequency direction finding, HF/DF or HFDUF, and acoustic homing torpedoes, had broken the back of the U-boat fleet. By 1944, Allied merchant shipping losses had fallen to insignificant levels. The U-boats that dared to venture out to sea had an average life expectancy of just 1.5 patrols. For every 10 submarines that left their heavily fortified pens in France or Norway, 7 would never return. By the end of the war, of the 1,162 U-boats built by Germany, 785 were destroyed. Of the approximately 40,000 men who served in the U-boat fleet, 28,000 were killed and 5,000 were captured. A casualty rate of over 70%, the highest of any military branch in any nation during the Second World War. The centimetric radar was a crucial factor in that mass destruction. But there is one final, staggering irony to this story. The Germans had access to the technology of centimetric radar long before the British deployed it operationally. In February 1943, 3 months before the destruction of U-456, a British Sterling bomber, equipped with an early version of the radar, crashed in German-occupied territory near Rotterdam. The radar set was almost perfectly intact. German technicians recovered it, examined it, and immediately understood its devastating implications. They wrote urgent reports to the High Command, warning that this technology posed an existential threat to the entire U-boat fleet. They screamed that the game had changed. The High Command ignored them. The German generals and admirals, focused on the brutal campaign on the Eastern Front and preparations to defend Fortress Europe from the anticipated Allied invasion, considered the warnings about a new radar to be exaggerated technical hysteria. They prioritized the production of tanks, fighter planes, and coastal fortifications over the development of countermeasures for a radar they assumed was not yet in mass production. By the time they changed their minds, it was already too late. If you're just discovering this incredible story of technological warfare, type Atlantic in the comments below. The story of U-456 and the centimetric radar illustrates a pattern that repeated itself throughout World War II. Technological supremacy wasn't just about who invented something first, but about who could produce it faster, deploy it more efficiently, and adapt more quickly. The Germans had brilliant scientists. They had capable engineers. They had innovative ideas. But the Allies had something more powerful, the industrial might to turn prototypes into thousands of operational units, the organizational flexibility to deploy new technologies with lightning speed, and the scientific intelligence to prioritize the innovations that truly mattered. The centimetric radar was manufactured in massive quantities by British and American companies. By the end of 1943, more than 1,200 Allied maritime patrol aircraft were equipped with the system. Every night, dozens of them prowled the U-boat transit routes, transforming the vast, dark Atlantic into a killing field where the hunters had become the hunted. Captain Lieutenant Teichert and his 49 crewmen were just the beginning. Every night, somewhere in the cold Atlantic, another German commander stared at his silent METOX detector, waiting for a warning that would never come. Another lookout strained his eyes in the darkness, searching for planes that were already diving on them. Another crew began an emergency dive that was already 90 seconds too late. And every night, the submarine war that had nearly strangled Great Britain and starved her into submission tilted a little more in favor of the Allies, one centimetric radar at a time. What do you think of this extraordinary story? Did you know the crucial role this secret radar played in turning the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring you verified, fascinating stories about the technologies that changed the course of history. Activate that notification